Hello beautiful people, this video is about how to deal with technical debt. The cool thing about technical debt, if there is anything cool about technical debt, is it's not just about patching code, it's actually about strategy, it's about prioritization, and it's about keeping your innovation engine running smoothly. Hi, I'm Jennifer Kenny, the best-selling author of The Innovation Mindset and the award-winning author of the book 100% Capacity. I work with Fortune 500 companies in robotics, machine learning and artificial intelligence, and I help them build their strategies for product delivery and development. I help the leaders in these organizations cut through the noise and build capacity and deliver with impact. Step number one with technical debt is to recognize that technical debt can be strategic and it's not always bad. In the innovation mindset, I talk about how constraints can fuel innovation. Technical debt is one of those constraints, and how you choose to handle it and how you choose to manage it is really important when it comes to your ability to be able to have it fuel your innovation or detract from your innovation. When you think about technical debt as strategic, not necessarily as bad, you can strategically get yourself into debt in order to be able to move fast, knowing that that's what you're doing. If you've quantified and qualified it, then you can pull yourself back out of it. If you have systems in place for managing it, it is a choice that you get to make and a strategic choice that you can make. When you think about technical debt, there's a reason why it's called debt, because you really want to think about it in terms of how much debt you're willing to take on and what is the risk of taking on too much debt. So think about it the same way that you would think about personal debt, about credit card debt, about mortgage debt, car loan debt. And the cool thing about thinking about it this way is that you become more cautious of understanding the implications of taking on the debt, and then you build thresholds that allow you to be able to understand exactly how much debt your project can actually handle and your team can actually handle. Reportedly developers spend about 25% of their time managing technical debt. So when you realize how much of that you're taking on, you're realizing how that's eroding your ability to be able to continue to move the project forward. So what I'm saying here is, if you think about it strategically and you recognize the drag it produces on your project, you can choose to go into debt for short periods of time, knowing that you're going to pull yourself back out and pay down the debt, so to speak, and clean up whatever shortcuts you've taken to enable you to be able to maybe get to an important demo or to be able to get to an important release date. Third thing that you can do is you can prioritize your repayment of the debt with your definition of success. So a moment ago I said you might be getting into debt in order to get to a release date. You might decide that your releases can't go forward without you being out of the technical debt. So now it depends on the relationship you have with the receiving product group as to whether or not you can, quote unquote, make a deadline and hand something off that has a certain level of debt associated with it, and you can clean that up later. Or you may decide, you may agree between yourself and the other product group that you can't hand something off with technical debt. Depending on where you draw those lines and the standards you set for each other as you work together, you may decide that you need to get rid of all of the debt before you hand the product over to the next phase of development or in integration or marketing. In order to be able to do this, you need to have a very clear and shared understanding of definition of success. In previous videos, I've talked about the customer performer loop and how that is absolutely integral to reducing customer debt and managing customer debt at the same time. When we think about the definition of success, or some organizations call it the definition of done, it's important to think about who is the person who is actually holding the standard for that. And ideally, it's multiple people on a team, but it is one person who's ultimately responsible for it and who is effectively the customer for declaring that something is done to their satisfaction. A lot of organizations talk about directly responsible individuals, DRIs, and the problem with DRIs is that means that that person is responsible for that, but it doesn't necessarily give them the power and the autonomy to be able to be the ones who set the standards and are integral to setting the standards and who to ultimately declare success. So when you start thinking about prioritizing your repayment of the technical debt based on your definition of success, remember that you need an internal customer who has the authority and the autonomy to be able to hold that definition of done, that definition of success, and to be able to declare when they are satisfied that that has been reached. A lot of the reason that we get into technical debt is because we accrue it without really understanding that there is somebody who that is going to significantly impact in terms of their ability to be able to move a project forward and declare done or complete on a certain phase of a project. If we understand who that customer is, then we know to include them in those conversations, and we know that they are the ultimate deciders of when we are actually complete and we are out of enough debt to be able to move forward to the next phase. So know who that person is on your project. Make sure they're the person who has the clout and the authority and the capability to be able to declare done on different phases of the project. They're also the ones who are ultimately responsible for the level of technical debt that the project is carrying. One of the most effective ways that I found to reduce, avoid, and manage technical debt well is to incorporate what I refer to as the loop or the action loop. And again, I've covered that in a couple of other videos. But if you start thinking in terms of people having conversations, making commitments to each other with clear standards and clear metrics and clear definition of done, and you begin to shore up the loose ends of your project where you're engaging people in those conversations and they are effectively making handshakes. They can be virtual handshakes, of course, but they are effectively making handshakes to say, I got it, you're my customer, I understand what we're delivering, I understand what satisfaction means for you, I understand what definition of done means in this particular case. I've been integral in designing that with you, and I will make sure that I deliver according to those standards and that my team delivers according to those standards. If you start thinking in terms of the loop, which is the develop, design, deliver, declare phases of the loop, you will start looking at how it is that we actually reach those agreements faster, and you build a team that has the capacity to be able to have those with a lot more agility and a lot more speed. The fifth thing that you can do is that you can budget repayment very deliberately. So lots of teams will design their sprints and organize their sprints and sort of forget about technical debt. And one of the things that I found is very effective as you start thinking about your next design for your next quarter, your plan for your next sprint, is to recognize that 10 to 20% of your time needs to be spent on getting the teams out of that debt, and we need to allow and budget for that time. Now, the other thing that's important to recognize is as the team moves forward and they get a really good understanding of how the product is sort of shaping up, they'll identify opportunities to be able to reduce the technical debt that will effectively be shortcuts. So sometimes as you think of technical debt strategically, you actually want to move the team ahead, knowing you're getting yourself into debt because you have a sense, based on your experience and your knowledge, that once they get to that next development level, they'll be able to look back and find more effective ways to be able to deal with the debt that you got yourself into in the first place. So sometimes if you have a team that are tuned to that and trained to do that and have experience in doing that, you can allow for the fact that the debt is not an absolutely rigid number, but it is something that you can bring down in fairly significant increments if you have the vantage point to look back and find more effective ways to deal with it based on having moved forward with significant product development. So sometimes you will make that decision. It's a little bit of a risk because you could end up carrying more debt, but if your team are trained to do this and they've done it a couple of times before, then you put them in a position where they can begin to pay down chunks of debt at quite significant pace. So when you start thinking about technical debt, recognize it's a strategic decision. If you have the processes and practices and the learning and the experience embedded into your team to be able to handle it well, it's something that you can strategically choose to take on. If you're in a position today where you have a lot of it and you don't have the practices and processes in place to handle it, then hopefully this video will give you some sense of how to go about doing that. I have a number of other videos on this subject. You can see them right here. I recommend that you have a look at those, and also have a look at my white paper, which is on my website under free resources. If you go to www.jenniferkenny.com, there's a section called free resources, and there's a white paper in there called Execution by Design, which covers some of the topics that I've mentioned in this video. I hope this helps. If it does, let me know. Like, comment, subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you in the future. Take care. Thank you.